Hello. I'd like to get started with the program here. I hope everybody's enjoying their food. Is it good? Yeah. I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the first of a series of activist forums at the IDF. We're proud to have Barry Romo here with us tonight to speak at our first one. Before we get started, I want to thank a few people who are here, or some who may not be here. I'd like to thank Sang and Paul for cooking the dinner tonight that you're all enjoying. Rexandra also helped with the dessert. I want to point that out as well. Her and Sang cooked the dessert. And I'd like to point out that the dessert actually will be coming. It's set out now, but if everybody could be able to hold off on that. It may be a little too late for some people, but if you could hold off on that until after Barry speaks and the questions and answers, we'll be having a social time when you'll be able to engage with Barry on more of a one-on-one basis, and you can grab dessert at that point as well. Also like to thank Dave and Tim from the co-op, who on their co-op time helped to do work on tonight's project. Tina. I'd like to thank Tina, Alana, and Aaron, who helped set up. Also like to thank Jeff Machota for doing the videotaping tonight and the PA system. I'd like to thank Aaron, who helped bake the bread for tonight. He was the one who baked the bread that you're eating. And also the Hillel Foundation for providing the PA system that I'm using. But especially I'd like to thank everybody who came out today to support the IDF. This is a fundraiser. I want to let everybody know that we have so far raised, I believe we've raised $455 so far, which is a great amount. We're getting close to that $500 amount, so if anybody still has some pocket change they want to contribute, they're welcome to do that to reach that mark. I also want to give a special thank to the Crouches who made it out tonight, all the way from Danville.
Decatur.
Oh, Decatur, I'm sorry, Decatur. They heard about this event at 2 p.m. and made it out here to join us, so thank you for coming. And last, I'd like to thank Jim Holloman for being with us. As most everybody knows, his last year in a 36-year career here at the IDF. He's influenced all of us in many ways. And I'm sure he influenced Barry in many ways too. So thank you, Jim, for all your work here. Then I'd like to get on to introducing Barry Romo, who's going to be our speaker tonight. Barry is the National Coordinator of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. He's the Administrative Vice President of the Mail Handlers Union at the O'Hare branch in Chicago. And for this special occasion, he even shaved to be with us. So those of you who've known Barry over the years, this may be the first time you've ever seen him with a clean face. It is for me. So let's give Barry a round of applause.
I did. I shaved just for this event. And also, just in case you got mad at me, I'd be able to get out of town and most people wouldn't recognize me. I was really proud when Robin called me and asked me to speak and to actually do something that I don't do very often, except maybe in small groups, and that's talk about people that I've known and that have influenced me throughout my political life. First off, I don't want to talk about people that you know. If I did, I can look around the room and see enough friends and comrades that I'd be talking about all of the people in here, starting with Jim and all the way down to Brooke and Allison. So I'm just going to talk about people that you don't know that have influenced me for the last 30 years of my 51-year life. When I got back from Vietnam, I was confused and dazed and trying to figure out what I had just done and been involved in. And I changed and became politically active against the war because people talked to me, questioned me. They didn't spit on me. They didn't condemn me. They did something that the right wing didn't do. They let me talk, and then they asked questions that I couldn't answer correctly. And they didn't then jump on me and attack me and prove their point, but continued to ask questions until I could no longer stand off to the side trying to defend the people that I had killed, the friends that I had lost, and instead change sides and join the struggle against the war. When I became politically involved, it was a lot easier for me to be involved in civil rights work and Black Panther work, support work around George Jackson, people might know. I became friends with George Jackson's attorney, Jonathan Thorne. And in 1971, after we had thrown our medals away, I went to an ACLU meeting in Riverside, California, and all of the people were real excited about us young vets throwing our medals away, and also a guy named John Kerry, who's now a senator, and what a great spokesman he was. And at the same time, there was an Afro-American woman who was pleading the case of her husband, who had been arrested for killing 2 white cops. He had been a leader in the Afro-American community of Riverside. And they barely paid attention to her. And she was real forceful. And so I started talking to her, and we took her aside. I had met her husband, Gary Lawton. Her name was Chiquilla, a number of times. He'd been a very forceful speaker in the Black community, and had basically been framed for murdering 2 white cops. Gary had organized and everything from self-help programs to flood relief. And he spoke out against the system and the racism that was inherent in it. And so despite the fact that when these 2 cops were originally killed and they were looking for some white guys in fatigues that then changed to some black guys and fatigues with big afros and clean shaven, and finally they got down to Gary, who was not clean shaven, was bald headed with no afro, and was light skinned, and instead of running away from the incident, he was actually running to it to quiet the community down. They put him in solitary confinement where he stayed for 2 years, and VVAW worked on his case. And over the years, I'd heard about Gary, but I hadn't met him. We would see him in court in a place called Indio, California. We would never stand when the judge came in because Gary didn't stand, and we showed our respect for him and our disrespect for the system at the same time. And when Gary got out, he needed bodyguards. The cops were crazy. After a while, they started thinking that he had killed these guys, even though he hadn't. And myself and another guy named Rusty Bernard were doing bodyguard work for him one day, and we looked across the Riverside courthouse, and we saw a burly, big guy with a t-shirt on. And we could see through his t-shirt, it looked like a motorcycle guy, and he had a swastika all the way across. And in a wreath. And we thought, oh no, this is it. Rusty and I start moving towards the guy, start getting ready to block him off so he doesn't get Gary. Gary came, pushed us aside. And the next thing we know, Gary Lawton, black militant, is hugging this white guy with a swastika on his chest. They're patting each other the back. They're talking about what it was like to be in solitary confinement next door to each other. And after Rusty and I breathed a sigh of relief, we said, what the fuck is going on here? And Gary said, well, you know, I was in solitary for 2 years before you finally got me out. And he said, this guy was on one side of me, and he was a Nazi. He would keep talking against Jews and blacks, and I would ask him every day, well, tell me about why you hate the Jews. And he said, finally, he said, you know, I had a friend in grammar school. I really don't know why I hate him. And Gary just kept talking to him about people being people, and he said, why do you hate me? And after talking in solitary confinement for about 18 months, Gary won this guy over. And the Riverside and San Bernardino County prisons are real bad places. In fact, the San Bernardino County was known for the most rapes. And one of the ways the police would keep people fighting was they would throw young blacks to white motorcycle gangs, and they would throw young whites to black gang bangers so that they'd be sexually abused. And that would keep the tension up, and then the guards could keep the people fighting each other. And this guy, when he got done with being in solitary, and of course they released him before they released Lawton, they put him in a cell with a bunch of other motorcycle Nazis, and they threw in a 19-year-old Afro-American kid to get raped. And the Nazi pushed the black kid into the corner and defended him and fought off the other motorcycle gangs, putting his life on the line for a person. Well, he had a swastika on his chest. It always impressed me because Gary had that ability, even though he was, quote, a nationalist, to talk to people on a real level and to work to win them over rather than just shut them out. And I'll never forget that, and that's one of the things that sort of stayed with me. We eventually got Gary off, and he moved to Northern California because he had to give up everything he had. But Gary stayed political. He's still political today. In 1972, prior to this, I was working in the National Office of Vietnam Vets Against the War, and I was sent down to Miami to organize. And I was down there organizing, became really good friends with Dave Dillinger. I'm not going to talk about Dave except to say that because of that friendship, later on that year, he suggested to the Vietnamese that I go to North Vietnam even though the war was still going on. And so in December of 1972, I got to go to North Vietnam, which was an honor and a little bit scary. I got to North Vietnam, and 3 days later the bombing started, and then, of course, the United States dropped the equivalent of a nuclear bomb on Vietnam in Hanoi every day for 10 days in a row, killing tens of thousands of people every day, workers' quarters, other things. And the Vietnamese were always kind and good to us. And they constantly were throwing parties for us to try to keep our spirits up. It was amazing. Here we were, Americans in Levi's, Joan Baez, a guy named Telford Taylor, who was the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, and the Reverend Michael Allen, who was the assistant dean of theology at Yale. And despite the fact that their country was being destroyed, they would get us drunk, get food for us, and make sure that we were taken care of really well. They would let us go out and visit the bombed out sites, but then they would make sure that we were also back near bomb shelters at the night. And about the third day that we had tried to leave, because we weren't able to, the airports were closed down. There was 150 B-52s alone that were hitting Hanoi once to twice a day. They had a big party for us, and they actually baked a cake from scratch. North Vietnam was so poor at that point that they had no eggs and no sugar, and they literally scraped things together. One orange, one egg. Their cook made this cake for us. They were so proud of it. And the other thing is that the Vietnamese actually drink more than my heritage, which is Mexicans and Irish, put together. These people drink and smoke cigarettes called Dien Bien Foods, which make camels seem like sissy cigarettes. These things will kill you. So they're smoking, they're drinking, and they had thousands of kinds of alcohol. They had orange liqueurs, and they had beer that was 10% and didn't have much foam in it. They had rice whiskeys and rice wines, and my God, they even had champagne. Thank God I didn't have to drink it until 10 years later. Someone brought me a bottle. It was really horrible. But I would have drank it if the Vietnamese had given it to me. And we started drinking, and I'd been seeing what the United States had done to the Vietnamese And I remembered what I had done personally to the Vietnamese. And I thought about the 6 people that I had killed, and I thought about my nephew who had died in Vietnam, and I thought about the people underneath me that died. And I broke down, and I started to cry in the middle of the dinner. And the Vietnamese from the Vietnam My Society, it's interesting, the word in Vietnamese for American is Mai. And the people from the Vietnam My Society surrounded me, took me off to a corner, separated me from the other Americans, like 10 or 12 mother hens around one little chick that's in trouble. And they started talking to me about my nephew, and talking to me about stuff. And finally, Mr. Quat, who had lost everything in the bombing, and not a stick of furniture left, no clothes left, and who was gracious and concerned about my well-being, started talking to me, and he said, Barry, he said, the problem is that you're only working on the basis of guilt and on the basis of hate. And he said, these are 2 destructive emotions. You can't work off of these. He said, your government took your precious idealism and it turned it around, and they used it to get you to kill Vietnamese for them. That's not your fault, because now you've taken the correct political stand. And so you have to stop working off of guilt and off of hate, because they're destructive and you cannot build from them. And you have to start working on the basis of love. Love of the American people and love of the Vietnamese people. And they said, someday this war is going to end. And he said, when it does, you'll enjoy peace like nobody else. Because you'll know what war is like in the South as a GI. You'll know what war was like in the North under the American bombing. And when peace comes, you'll know the peace of both areas. It took me a long time to incorporate that. 2.5 years of therapy. But what the Vietnamese commies told me was absolutely true, and it's something that all of us have to bear in mind sometimes. We have to build upon our constructive emotions, and we have to put our others behind us. We have to realize that sometimes we get caught up, and sometimes other people get caught up in things that aren't there. I have a quote from somebody. Why? Because I like this guy. And that is Samor Michael, who is the leader of the revolutionary struggle in Mozambique, who died, basically was assassinated in a plane wreck by South African apartheid government forces. And his wife, widow, is now married to Nelson Mandela. So I guess she had revenge on the apartheid forces by becoming the First Lady of South Africa. But before he died and while he was leading the struggle, he made this statement. Oppression does not exist because the local or higher administrator or governor are evil, hard-hearted men who find satisfaction in exploiting us. Generally speaking, as individuals, as people, they are neither better nor worse than anyone else of whatever race. They are what they are because of the position they occupy. It is for this reason that we always say we are fighting against the system and not individuals. As I went along in the movement, continued to work. Oh, one other thing was kind of funny was the Vietnamese in North Vietnam shot down 33 B-52s. And there was a guy named Curtis LeMay who said that we should bomb Vietnam back into the Stone Age. One of the Vietnamese, after they shot down like the 30th B-52, commented and was laughing. He said, well, LeMay says that they're going to bomb us back in the Stone Age, but you know what, Romo? We're going to shoot down B-52s until we're in the Aluminum Age. And they did, because they made pots and bowls and rings and planters out of B-52 and aluminum parts, and then they actually brought those things back to the United States as gifts to different people. In 1987, I got to go back to Vietnam at a time when it wasn't peace. I went to North Vietnam and I went to South Vietnam. And it was a great catharsis to see the place building, although poor, to see a place that per capita was on a level with Haiti, and yet where people were not starving on the streets, had a modicum of clothes, where everyone was educated much better in the United States, in which they did divide stuff up, tried to get things towards for the children. In fact, we went to we were taken around by one woman who was head of the committee to defend mothers and children, and her job was to monitor and make sure that people got shots in North Vietnam. She had come up with schools making their own I was just asking, was in if it was a dairy product earlier. That was, my brain's not working hard. Anyway, it's that creamy stuff in the cups that everybody likes. Yogurt. So she'd come up with them making yogurt in the schools themselves. She'd come up that all shots had to be given at schools. And she came up with, they had to give the vitamins at schools, and they wouldn't let people take them home because they wanted to make sure that the children got them. And she said, well, you know, we really don't have much, but one thing is, we may not be able to have socialism for adults, but we're going to make sure that we have socialism for the grammar school kids, and that was their attitude at that time. And she could really talk, and she was really quite boring, and we'd been there for a couple of days, and naturally we'd been drinking with the Vietnamese because they still drank even though the war was over. And we were making jokes off to one another about her. And she started asking us about what we had done in the war, so of course we reciprocated and said, well, what did you do in the war? And she said, well, I was a trade union organizer and a woman organizer, but I got arrested, and I spent 6 years in Con Son Island. Well, Con Son Island is one of the worst torture places in Vietnam. The United States, a place called Brown and Root, a company that was owned by Lady Bird Johnson, or partially by Lady Bird Johnson, built concrete tiger cages as cells. Now, cells, what these are, is holes dug in the ground, and they were 5 feet by 6 feet, maybe 4 or 5 feet high. They had no windows because they were built down, and the cell door was on top where the roof would be, so they couldn't see anybody else, they couldn't communicate, they couldn't stand up. And then there was another building built over that so that they could never see. And people were raped and tortured, and lye was thrown on them, and all of a sudden our little jokes about the little madam changed into incredible, of course, guilt when we realized what she'd been through. And we said, oh my God, that's terrible. She goes, oh, no, that wasn't a problem. My husband, he was there for 9 years. And that tended to be their attitude. It was a self-effaciousness of when you tried to point up the problems that they had been through. There was a humility that shone through into always saying something about somebody else who had it worse than them. We went to a county fair because there was 50-some nationalities in Vietnam. And it was funny, we were walking it, and they even they had booths, and they had people dressed up in the clothes of Hmong and Hung and Chinese. There's a large Chinese community. They even had French. They considered the French a national minority, and they had some people there with bad cooking or something, I don't know. And so we're walking around, and they're playing their music, and they're speaking in their language, and they had little games for the children to play like you do at county fairs here, except it was a little machine gun kind of thing, and they were shooting down American helicopters. It's kind of funny, and they tried to hide it from us all to spare our feelings, but we really laughed. And one guy noticed this, and there was 5 of us, and of course we're all Americans, so we look like Americans. I probably look like GIs because I never take off my VVAW hat, as all of you know, even in the shower. And in the private of my closet, I do change my hat. So occasionally you'll see a different hat, but it's always my VDAW hat. And they saw it, and they saw our button, and he came over and he said, "Look, my boss has just got to meet you." And we had a woman named Madam Howe, who was our keeper. Madam Howe was badass. And she spoke 5 languages. She spoke Vietnamese, Chinese, Russian, French, and English perfectly. We were at the airport, and she stopped speaking English to us and started speaking Russian to people like that, and then started speaking French to somebody else. Brilliant woman. And when we had stuff set up, she didn't like to have any variations. And so this guy said, "Look, my boss is the Minister of Culture for the southern section of Vietnam, for all the southern section, and he would really like to meet you. I know all the guys would like to meet you." And so he said, "Well, what did you do in the war?" And he said that he was in the Viet Cong intelligence and that he had worked out of Saigon for 6 years. We knew this guy had to be a badass because given the Phoenix program, which slaughtered 20 to 40,000 people, this man was lucky to be alive. And he said, "Well, what do you want? Maybe we can offer you something." And Vietnam was so poor that they can't celebrate liberation every year. They can only do it every other year. And the liberation of South Vietnam takes place on April 30th, and then you've got May Day, which is, of course, the Workers' Day. So here they would have 4 days or 5 days off, and they couldn't afford to do it. And we were there on the year when they weren't celebrating. And we thought we were going to bring back all kinds of political posters. And really, the only posters they had up, which we thought were these giant banners. And finally, we asked if we could get one, and they told us that those were just the announcements of how high the local lottery was. So we decided we didn't want those. But they looked like they had to be political because they were red and yellow. But it was just the lottery scores. And guy says, "I'll tell you what, I will guarantee you, if you come to the Ministry of Culture tomorrow and meet with us, I will guarantee you we will have posters." So Madam Howe looked at us. We were supposed to go to the number 4, I think it is, hospital in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, which is the Agent Orange Children Hospital. And she said, "On second thought, why don't we skip that? We'll do some things, and you guys can go see these guys. That way you won't leave on a bad note." And we were very thankful because we did not want to see the gross birth defects that are still killing and deforming Vietnamese children. Up to 29% of the children in some areas of South Vietnam, former South Vietnam, are born with birth defects of incredible magnitude. Body parts born outside their body, brains outside, cyclops. And so we go there in the morning, and all of a sudden we sit down and we meet the Minister of Culture, who happens to be had been a major general in the Viet Cong army. And he had been the political officer for the 9th National Liberation Front Division. Well, I know my units, and that was the original Viet Cong unit. That was the original one that went from a battalion to a regiment, from a regiment to a division. And this man had spent 16 years in the underground. He'd been every rank from a field grade officer to a major general, and his job was to keep the morale of the 9th Division alive. He was there during the Tet Offensive, was there during the Easter Offensive of 72, and he was there during the liberation struggle. This man had seen a minimum of 15,000 of his comrades dying. And yet he didn't have a 100-yard stare like some of us had. He was friendly. He talked about things, and he asked us about things, what we thought, and what we did. And he had little half coconuts for us with little umbrellas in them, and they made the drinks themselves, and they served them themselves, and they got us drunk because, of course, they were Vietnamese. They made us smoke cigarettes. We met everybody else, and we discovered that all the other officers in the Ministry of Agriculture were also, or the other officials, had all been Viet Cong, and they had also all been in the intelligence except himself. And we talked and talked, and then he said, well, now we've got to pay you off. We promised you posters. And he brought a poster out which showed the Saigon Capitol building and a tank, because a tank, of course, went through the gate and a Viet Cong flag flying on it. And it was still wet. They'd stayed up all night painting posters for us. And they were beautiful. I got one in my home. If you ever come visit me, you'll see it. And they were still wet. And, here we were, people that had fought and killed and oppressed them, and the only thing that mattered to them was the stand that we took today. So much so that they wanted to meet us. Gave up a night's sleep to paint posters for Vietnam vets. The next year I was real lucky. I got to go to the Philippines, and I went there, I thought underground. I later found out CIA was following me, and that's another story. But I got there basically to check civil human rights and also to meet people in the underground movement. And I also met people in the above ground movement, and stayed at a Catholic orphanage where the good Catholic priest from Ireland took care of children, and only children who had been raped by American servicemen, both men and women, at Subic Bay. And this place was full. And he was a professional psychologist besides a priest, and there was kids anywhere from 10 to 17 years old there. And but that's not what I'm going to talk about. When I went down to Mindanao, which is the southernmost island, I traveled around and I met a lot of workers. And when people found out I was a Vietnam vet, it was like this automatic, come tell me about how the Viet Cong fights so that you can tell us how we can win. And I got called to a meeting of independent journalists, and we talked and talked and talked. They asked me questions, and we talked some more. After several hours of discussion, they said, okay, what do you want? And I said, well, I want to talk to people about human rights violations. And people said, and I want to talk to people who've been jailed, tortured, and stuff like that, because I have to bring this back to the United States to let people know what's going on here. And so people said, well, everybody here has suffered. And people really don't talk about those things. And I said, well, that's okay. I understand. That's all right. And one young woman with a pockmarked face, but so beautiful, but she wasn't. People in third world a long time have skin problems that we don't get in America. And very young, 23, 22 years old, I don't know. And she said, Barry, I'll tell you. So she says, we'll talk. And she took me into another room, and we made instant coffee, which is the best you could do in Mindanao. They don't have real coffee. And she started talking, and she just told me her story. And I can't use her name even to this day because of the nature of the work that she did. And she said, well, all she'd been was a student leader, 19-year-old, at the university in Davao City. And she worked on not raising tuition, on making sure that books didn't cost too much, but she also opposed the Philippine War against the Muslims, who make up about 50% of the island. And so she was a peace activist and a student activist. And one day in the middle of the night, under the Marcos dictatorship, she was arrested. And her and all of the other student leaders and student activists disappeared. She was separated and sent to a prison. And I can't remember what they're called, but they actually have a special name in the Philippines. And her cell was a concrete block cell inside another cell. so that it was a little square room inside a normal cell. And the back wall faced the window so that she could never see out. There was no door on the little concrete room inside the cell. There was a small window, and she would have to crawl in and out of that to use the restroom or whatever, and people would serve her food inside there. And she was kept inside there for years, and no one would talk to her except the people who tortured her and the guards that raped her. For 2.5 years, she was tortured and raped. And finally one day, a captain came up to her and said, "We're going to release you." She was convinced she was going to be killed. There was no reason to release her. And so she said, "You're my third guy to torture and rape me. And you've never asked me a single question. Why not?" He said, "Well, either you're innocent and you don't know anything, or you really are an activist, which means you won't tell me anything." So it didn't matter to him. And he continued to torture and rape her. She thought she was going to be killed, but what they did was they took her, put her on a bus, and sent her home. Her parents thought that she was a ghost, literally. None of the other people that had been kidnapped with her were alive. People had bragged in prison about being trained by Americans and being on American bases. She went home. She gathered her wits about her. She became a journalist. And she went into the countryside after 2.5 years of this, documenting human rights violations by the Philippine military that had just kept her in prison. A woman so strong and so dedicated that she took the pain and turned it into action to make other people's lives better. Guess I have to return a little bit to the United States, and that is, there was just a special on PBS. Some of you may have seen it, some of you, if you haven't, I think Jill and some other people got a documentary about a guy named Clarence Fitch. Clarence was the East Coast coordinator of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. He was an Afro-American Marine. He was a trade unionist who had led a Wildcats in the New Jersey post office in the 70s of thousands, 5,000 postal employees. He could never stop taking heroin. The pain of what he did in Vietnam and what he saw on those 18 months, the pain of the racism, the pain of the capitalist system that we live under was too much for him. And even when he was politically active, he couldn't stop shooting up heroin, even though he was the head of the largest Narcotics Anonymous chapter in the United States. A great speaker. And like so many people who put needles in their arms, he got AIDS. And he would go on downward spirals of illness and plateauing off. And when he would go under, I would get calls from the emergency room or from intensive care, because I'm in Chicago, he was in New Jersey. And he'd be talking about the anti-apartheid movement and how he was going to kick it one more time. And even though he was dying, he didn't wallow in self-pity. He used every bit of strength he had to the day he died to fight apartheid, to fight for peace. Went to Central America, went to Panama right before the U.S. invasion. And to his dying day was an inspiration to everybody in Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And what's always important to me about the movement, what the Vietnamese said and what these people have taught me, is the fact that struggling for freedom is liberating in and of itself. It gives life an existence that you can't have in any other way. It allows you to meet people who are only of the highest caliber. Yes, there's assholes. There's assholes everywhere. But you get a lot more nice people, a lot more good people. And you get people that you can trust with your lives, people you can trust with your sanity, people you can trust with your friendship. The movement for liberation is a movement that empowers you and other people as you fight for other people to be empowered. I no longer have a nationality. I can't be swayed by apple pie and a flag. I've got more in common with a Palestinian on the East Bank. I've got more in common with a Mayan trying to keep from being slaughtered in Guatemala. I've got more in common with a peasant in the Zapatistas. I've got more in common with someone in East Timor, peasant in Burma, than I've got with the head of Levi's or Nike. I don't care whether they speak English. I don't give a fuck about Jordan. Michael Jordan makes $1 million motherfucking dollars, $50 million, $100 million a year. So what if he can fucking drop a basketball in a hoop? When a young woman came from Indonesia and begged to meet with him and just said, Michael, could you say that Nike has the right to organize a union? Michael said, I don't take political stands, I just talk for this. And so Michael takes more money for being a spokesman than every single worker in Asia get paid for producing tennis shoes. The culture won't give me my heroes. I found my heroes. I know who my heroes are. My heroes are sitting in front of me. My heroes are in the Philippines. My heroes are in Vietnam. I have to share one thing with you before I go on to some questions. Do people see this? This is a poster. I love this poster. See what it says? Vote in the streets. GOP convention, August 21 to 24. San Diego, 72. I'm from Southern California. 1972, we were organizing against Richard Nixon. And we were organizing specifically against the Republican Party. And in 1972, the Republican convention was not held in San Diego. So why the fuck do I have a poster that says, March on San Diego? Well, San Diego was where the Republican convention was supposed to take place. But the movement was so strong that even though Richard Nixon had the FBI and the CIA, had all the television stations, the governor was this asshole named Ronald Reagan, who's probably entered your life at some later point. So he has the governor, has the highway patrol, he has all the powers of the state, and they became so afraid of the organizing that they moved the convention to Miami, Florida, because they said it'll make demonstrators less likely to drive through Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And of course he was right. And of course we won. We made a sitting president, a sitting party, change where the fuck they met. That's power. Can we have it again? Yeah. Can we create it out of our heads? No. Do we have to learn from our past mistakes, of course. Can we? Doing it every day.
We're going to take a few questions and answers right now, and then Barry will be available for more informal questions and answers from people one-on-one. So when he gets back here, after getting some tea, we'll start calling on people for questions. I guess while he's getting his tea, let me make one more thank you from people I forgot to thank earlier. And I wanted to acknowledge that the people from PACE, Citizens for Homes, and the Champaign County Healthcare consumers are here with us tonight as well. So we wanted to thank them for coming out and supporting the idea. So if anybody has questions, you can ask them now.
VVAW doesn't have a position on what's going on in Serbia. And I won't say Yugoslavia because there is no Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia ended a long time ago. The Balkans is not new to me, and it's not new to people, especially in Chicago. For over 10 years I've worked on human rights with anti-fascist Serbians, Croatians, Muslims, Slovenians, Serbians who fought for the multi-ethnic Bosnia and Herzegovina government. I've defended, and other people in the chapter have defended rape counselors from Serbian thugs who would stop the counselors who came from areas of former Yugoslavia who were counseling the 35,000 Bosnian Muslim women who were raped by the Serbian fascist military. And so it's not something new. I've trained Muslims in mosques, men and women, when nobody else cared about them. They would even cry. We would have all-night vigils during the bombing and killings at Srebrenica and Sarajevo. And at the same time, I have close friends who are in Women in Black, which is a Serbian group, and other people, including people in the former military of Milosevic, people whose families are still there. People who I can't even say their names because their parents would be killed because they're backing the bombing. And they're much like Germans who backed the bombing when the Germans were killing the Jews. I never thought, personally, I would be backing a U.S. military action. And I don't say what I say with any righteousness. But I know this. I know what they did in Bosnia, with the slaughters, the massacres, and the ethnic cleansing. And I'm talking about the Serb fascists. I've talked to Serbian military about what they did. The stuff even makes me, as a Vietnam vet, cringe. The things that I've been told. And I look at 850,000 ethnically cleansed people. People who were kicked out of an area that they've lived in for centuries merely because they're Muslim. People who 10 years ago, when Milosevic consolidated power, ended their rights to be civil servants, ended their rights to go to school, ended their rights to practice their religion, ended their rights to speak their language. And I demonstrated for the last 10 years, and in fact, demonstrated against Milosevic around all of the things that he was doing. The United States did everything in its power to keep him in power. The United States loves dictators, from Marcos to Milosevic to Mussolini to Pinochet. I don't know what's in the minds of NATO, but I do know this. Those people have a right to go back to their homes. And the only way they're going to be able to go back to their homes is if those served fascist military forces are out of there. I'm not a pacifist. I backed the ANC. I backed the guerrillas in Guatemala. I backed the Sandinistas. I backed the Vietnamese when they were shooting at me and killed my own nephew. Sometimes violence is the only answer. I didn't back the Persian Gulf War, I backed this. The one thing that bothers me about the left is I almost feel like we're watching different TVs. I see 800,000 refugees. 800,000 people ethnically cleansed. I hear women talking about the rapes that we know went on in Bosnia because they were documented. And the reason that rape today is a war crime is because of what Serbs and Milosevic did in Bosnia. Every single women's group in the world, except in Russia, one in the United States, even in Serbia, women in black supported it. And that expose, it's like the left doesn't hear that. It's like they don't hear the cries of those people. I've got to hear the cries of those people. I have to be a materialist. I'm not going to be a knee-jerk person. And so I support that action. I doubt if the United States will ever be in a position where I'll support them again. The U.S. hates it. The generals don't want it. The generals are fighting internally against it. There's none of this stuff that you saw around the Persian Gulf War in terms of a solid front. This is the first time in history that the United States is going to support Muslims against Christians. Do you think the U.S. feels good about that?
Robert?
I was talking with my dad recently. We were talking about the recent school shootings, and he thinks that there's kind of like a connection with like militarism in schools and school violence. Do you care to comment on that?
I think there's a connection between violence and violence. I mean, the thing is that first off, there's a question of how do men get defined? Why? And it's more than just testosterone, although that's really bad, and I actually remember when I had some. But it's more than that. It's how people define themselves, and they define themselves on the basis of committing violence against other people. One of your teachers raised the question of why young men have this sort of infatuation with Hollywood deaths. I mean, it's almost as if they're going to write their names on the stars. I was never afraid when I went in the military. It's strange as it may sound. I thought I was going to die. And I don't know why, probably because I was still a Catholic at the start of it, but it was like I was going to see the ending to this movie, even when it was going on. And there's something in terms of how men define themselves and how men define how they become men that is real. And that is not just in this society. It's around the world. It's something that's more than just capitalism, but it is capitalism. And it's more than just people enlisting in the militaries. It's more than just video games. My daughter and every teenage kid I know knows the difference between a video game and real people. I have questions. I mean, why are so many, they're all white males except for one female woman. They're all white males that have been doing this. Almost all from nice mountainous areas or rural areas. And a majority of their victims are women, and then minorities. And so they're going after women to prove there's something out of whack. And I really don't know. I was joking before, and pardon my bad jokes, I'll give them to you anyway. But you know, when there were shootings in the ghetto, when there were shootings in Chicago and LA and gang shootings, all we heard about was the black mothers, no fathers, rap music. What's the matter with the black family? What's the matter with the music that leads them to it? So now we have males, white males killing people, and are they saying, what's the matter with the NRA, country western music, good Christians, and the white family? They don't ask any of those questions. You know what they do? They send in 10,000 psychiatrists. Why is it when there's a shooting in a suburb of Boulder, they send in psychiatrists, and when there's a shooting in Chicago, they send in the police? I don't know. I don't have an easy answer. It's something we should all talk about. It's something we have to think about. And again, it's more than ROTC, it's more than video games, and it certainly ain't some songs that we play. And except for country western songs. Because I think they are the root of all evil.
In the back. Try to speak up because it's kind of loud.
Okay, I'd like to address the question that was asked. I am also a Vietnam vet, and I also worked at DBAW when we rocked out in Oakland. But I have a slightly different perspective. Not that I am against this idea of Western, but I want to share something with the people that about a year ago, a book came out of the market school, and
Would you please speak up?
well, I need a microphone. I know it's also loud. There's a book that came out about 2 years ago called "And the Truth Shall Set You Free," written by David Icke. And in this book, he gives you a factual, historical, proven overview that every war since the American Revolution were funded and supported by both sides, funded and supported both sides of all of the wars, up until this war in Kosovo, by the rich and powerful in Europe. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Freemans, all the multinational corporations, Federal Reserve, and so forth. So when we talk about a group of human beings fighting another group of human beings, you're talking about two human beings who are thinking that they are doing the right thing, not knowing that behind that upper management political scheme going on, there's profit involved. Capitalism makes profit off of war. Part of the reason Vietnam happened is because America was in a recession. There was a race movement going on. The young white youth who would join that movement would accelerate the speed of that Renaissance revolution for the 60s. And in order to squash that, they had to assassinate a president and change the policy. And Vietnam was for profit. It was a political statement. It was not about freedom and democracy. And on the other side, Ho Chi Minh was never a patriot of Vietnam, went to school in France, studied communism, not that I'm putting down communism, went to Russia, studied Russia, and these same rich, wealthy families who were in this organization called Bavarian Illuminati funded him to go back to Vietnam. And the first thing Ho Chi Minh did was to assassinate all the patriot leaders of the 4 or 5 different patriotic movements in Vietnam. Now this is documented. This is not a fantasy or a theory.
Maybe you should have another forum, and I'm sure people would like to come. but I do totally disagree with what you meant. It's a person who's respected on all sides. Even when Nguyen Cao Ki, dictator, starts his book, he said that all Vietnam cried the day Ho Chi Minh died, because he was the person that led the struggle that got rid of the French. And people did shoot each other. It certainly wasn't pacifists.
Well, I'm not saying that.
So,
What Ho Chi Minh
wanted to give everybody a chance to actually ask a question. So if there's anybody else who wants to ask a question.
I understand.
Okay. Is there any other questions for Barry?
Yes,
Crowd?
Barry, do you see anything going on in this great land of the free and home and brave that shows any sort of a real movement other than just philosophically discoursing, say, on campuses and so forth? Or do you see any student movement in universities and so forth? You see one or two leaders that are probably scratching their head and so forth, political science professors and so forth, but I see absolutely nothing except I read an article that what is really happening on campus today are smoking more. That's exactly what it is. I mean, I'm being sadistic now.
I think there's a lot of movement. I think a lot of it we don't see. He asked me whether I saw student. We don't see a lot of the student movement. One, because it doesn't get covered by anybody, but there's some real, across the country right now, there's a lot of new movement around the question of where people get their t-shirts from, and whether they're being made by sweatshops on college campuses or whether those are being made by trade union places, and what kind of conditions those workers are in. And most importantly, right here, I mean, we see real people leading real people. I mean, last year, I followed the leadership of people in this room who led 400 people to march against the chief, to say that this racist mascot had to go. 400 people walking through the center of a drunk tailgate party. I mean, one, everybody was brave. Two, they were well organized. They knew what they were doing. There's the potential for it. There's stuff going on, but there's not at this point a single issue that unites people. There was a single issue in terms of civil rights, that one question. There was a single issue in terms of the nature and length of the Vietnam War, but there isn't those sort of same questions. I think they're coming up more and more. But quite frankly, one of the reasons I'm so proud of being here tonight at the IDF is because of the work of the anti-racist mascot people. I mean, that's something that people across the country have to be proud of. I mean, these are people saying, I don't have to do this. I'm not an Indian. I'm not a Native American. I don't have to put my life on the line. These aren't people that just meet in a room. These are people that get in the streets. These are people that are willing to face down all those drunk alumni. And I was proud to be with them. I would have talked about them, but that's for another day.
Robin?
I'm not asking you to define this universally for everybody, but just from your personal kind of perspective, what are the kind of filters through which you filters and priorities that you look at the world through and make your biggest decision, your everyday decisions through? And what I mean by that is, I mean, there are a lot of issues that I care about, and there are some that I can never kind of put down for a minute, but there are others that I care about and I kind of tap in and out of. And I've compromised on the t-shirt issue before, okay? Or sometimes at IDF people have made decisions about who to contract work out to based on if their place is unionized, and sometimes based more on like family owned or priced right, So what are the, I guess, major filters, 2 or 3 or 4, that you kind of sort things through on a daily basis?
Well, there's certain levels, and that is that, goodness gracious, I've never been asked that question. I haven't, in my whole life. I try to live by some form of universal principle and universal outlook on other people. I don't have a thing that says you just got to buy union made. One, I can't afford it, quite frankly. On the other hand, I'm going to make sure that me and nobody I know wear Nike. I'm going to make sure that we aren't going to dress by style of name brand. And if that means going to a resale shop, which are kind of nice, or if that means going to Kmart, that's where I go. I mean, I don't go to Marshall Fields or stuff like that. I don't know people that do. Wow. I try to treat other people decently, and I have a temper that goes from A to Z, and I don't always keep my temper in line. And I tell you what I would change, and that's I would change. I've been in therapy, and it's hard for me to deal with. And even lots of times I'm real sad at the end of the day because I've got angrier than I should have gotten. Although there is such a thing as just and righteous anger. I don't want to say that's especially here at the Cycles Foundation. But there's also times when it's not. And golly gee, I'll get back to you. My life's been formed by where I am and what I see, and it's not religious. Partially it's a Marxist outlook. I look at things in terms of classes. I look at that's real. Part of it is that I really do believe that eventually that we can have a society where people work and exchange things, and it's not based on private property, and it's not based upon profit. I do believe that capitalism is not the end-all and be-all. I think that it's going to go into the dustbin, just like Marx said. And so I work on that basis. But I have to get back to you. I'm sorry. I'm shallower than I thought.
Well, either that or you're just real well educated.
Any other questions here?
I got a couple of more things. One is a poem I love. The small gorilla holds her gun at the ready. The burly American bends his head low. After all, a stout heart is better than a big belly. One needs have no beard to become a hero. It's written by Tu Wa, and it's a poem in honor of Ha Tuyen, I can't pronounce her last name, who is a woman, Vietnamese woman, who is about 4'1", who captured an American pilot who was about 6'10". It's a very famous photograph. And a stout heart is what's the most important thing. And I don't want to embarrass somebody, but we have a friend and comrade who is leaving us. And so, this is a poster that was made of a Playboy ad. And in 1971, Hugh Hefner gave us a free ad, believe it or not. 10,000 Vietnam veterans joined VAW off a Playboy ad. And this is the ad. And we don't have very many of these left. But we do have a friend and an activist who is going down south. And I want to honor her before she leaves us. Allison, I want to give you this to remember. Just remember this, the stout heart, Allison. And also, you got to come back to us.
So all those of you who have not gotten dessert yet are course, welcome to get your dessert. And Barry will be here to talk with you if you want to ask him more questions informally. Thank you all for coming again. Have a safe trip home.